Now, at the end of our last class, Mr. Sabev asked me to talk about the secret to building an inclusive organization. Now, he'd read a paper my wife and I and some co-authors have recently published regarding, oh, for shame, she's late, and she can't blame it on her wounded wing.
Can't anymore.
Oh, he's late too. So he went from KISS to AC/DC, and now he's wearing the Oakland Raiders shirt. I just don't know how to interpret this man.
It's the draft.
It's the draft.
Not the military draft. It's Browns.
If you want people to know you're a hostile male and you can't afford a large pickup truck, just get an Oakland Raiders sticker.
I mean, I wore it at the bank and they make jokes. I wore an ankle bracelet.
The Raiders have always, I remember from the 70s, and it's like, how are these guys not in jail? Okay, back to the story. So, the secret to creative and inclusive organization. My wife and I, along with two other co-authors, published, and it was from the perspective of being neurodivergent. I think I've told you guys I'm slightly autistic, slightly or not slightly, depending on who you ask. My wife has been diagnosed with ADHD. That means that our clocks don't tick exactly the same as everybody else's. And so the paper was all about how do you make a workplace that's inclusive of these things. Now, it doesn't boil down to making accommodations for people. Oh, for shame, she's late. It doesn't boil down to making accommodations for people. Let's talk about how you can make any workplace inclusive. So, oh, for shame. Plus he's wearing black socks and Crocs. Holy shit. Okay, so the CEO at the firm, he says, we need more cohesion. Why is that? What's the goal of financial management? Maximize shareholder wealth. Why is the CEO concerned about cohesion? He thinks we could be more efficient if we'd actually work together, which, there's some truth to that, right? And so who does he reach out to? He reaches out to Karen from HR. You guys may already know Karen. Karen says, oh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I've got to do something to keep my phony baloney job. So what does she do? She says, I remember from kindergarten something called the golden rule. What's the golden rule?
Treat others how you want to be treated.
Yeah, treat others how you want to be treated. Some of you may have heard that in a Christian perspective. It actually goes way back across all sorts of different cultures. Almost every culture has their version of the golden rule. Okay, now, so what Karen says is, you know what? I know what I would like. I would like a big party with pointy hats. I can tell you guys aren't into the big party with pointy hats, and neither was I, right? Okay, so Karen's going to throw the big party with pointy hats, and there are some people who feel secure enough in their jobs, and this is the reason I wrote this guy's name up here. His name was Kaz. He was one of my dad's co-workers, and when he was being pressured into going to the company picnic, he said, and I quote, I may have to work with you bastards, but I don't have to socialize with you. Right? And so some people are going to not go to the party, but there are going to be some people who are in vulnerable positions who feel they must go to the party out of social pressure. For example, assistant professors. Assistant professors, if they don't get tenure, they get fired. Who votes on their tenure? Their coworkers, right? And so, if we think they're not being social, I would never do this, but some people would say, well, he's not very collegial. That's the word they use. Because he didn't go to the freaking hat and wear the pointy, or go to the party and wear the pointy hat. Okay, so Karen, she throws the party and she notices that some people are missing and she notices that other people are miserable and then other people like me are standing in the corner trash talking Karen, right? Okay, so the next morning she says, well, that didn't work. I could tell that I had, probably different groups of people there. And so I needed to change my approach. And so what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to divide into 3 groups by some characteristic. And I couldn't tell you what it is, but she's got this figured out. And she says, I'm going to do something different for each group. Now, we don't have a name for this. We've got the golden rule. I'm going to teach you the platinum rule. I'm going to call this the crap rule. And the reason that the poo emoji is purple is because we didn't have any brown markers. Sorry about that. Okay, so here's the crap rule is that I'm going to divide these people up and I'm going to do something different for each group. Now, Karen, of course, she knows everything. Is she going to actually talk to these people to figure out what the hell they want? No, she just assumes based on stereotypes in her head what each one of these groups would like. And so she's going to do something special for each one of these groups. But problem number one, heterogeneity within the group. Heterogeneity means that it's not all the same. If it's all the same, it's homogeneous. If it's not, it's heterogeneous. And I'm going to demonstrate it right now with some groups in this class. Raise your hand if you are a student athlete, have been or ever have been at all. Okay, now look around, the people that have their hands up. Do these people all have the exact same personality as you? For shame! No. Do they all have the same hopes, dreams, and aspirations as you? No. Does it make sense that putting the same thing out for all of you doesn't make any more sense than the pointy party hats, right? Okay, here let's do another group. International students, raise your hands. Do you guys have different concerns? Yeah, you've got different concerns. So you're not all the same, right? And so it doesn't make any sense to have these cookie cutter things for the different groups. So that's the first problem. The second part is envy. If I do something different for group A than I do for group B, or group B than I do for group C, we always have the possibility of envy. And I want to show you this video. I want you to watch very closely. Are you ready? It's not long. Okay, who was responsible for dividing up the treats? The owner. Who does the dog get mad at? Yeah, not the owner, right? Gets mad at the two stuffed dogs, right? And so this problem of envy, it doesn't lead, it also causes the people to hate the manager, especially Karen, but it causes trouble between the groups is the important thing, and that actually leads to less cohesion, which is exactly what the opposite of what we were trying to achieve. So, what can we do here? Well, there's a couple of things. Number one, I'm going to teach you about the platinum rule. Does anyone know the platinum rule? By the way, platinum is more precious than gold. Did you know that? Okay, here's the platinum rule. Do unto others as they would have done unto them. Not what I think they would want, but what they actually want. Do unto others as they would have done unto them. Now, how in the world am I going to know what they would have done unto them? By the way, do you think it's the same for everybody? No, if it was, this would work, but it's not. How do I find out? Ask them. So I had this guy, and his name was Bobby. Bobby was pushing 60 at the time. He was a magnificent machinist, and I forget what miracle he pulled off. And I dropped by his machine. I said, Bobby, thank you so much. He said, oh, you're welcome. I said, I'd like to recognize you in front of the group. He said, if you do, I'll quit. Does the same, yeah, some of you are like, yeah, that'd be great. And others are like, forget that, right? But how do you know? You ask. And I said, well, Bobby, I'd like to do something nice for you. What could I do? He said, how about a $50 gift certificate to the Outback Steakhouse? That was back when the Outback Steakhouse was good. Anyway, and when $50 could feed you and your wife nicely, right? Even including dessert. And so that's what I did. And so talk to people, ask them, find out. And here is the other thing. Oh, by the way, fairness. Is fairness doing the same thing for everyone? No. Fairness is having a good reason for treating people differently. Having a good reason for treating people differently. One good reason to treat people differently? Not everybody wants to be recognized in front of the group, right? Okay, now let's talk about comparative advantage. Hopefully you guys took an economics class at one point or another and you paid attention enough to know that not everybody is equally good at everything. For example, Arkansas is really good at making chickens, terrible at growing apples. Washington is great at growing apples, terrible at making chickens. If we have both of those states working at their comparative advantage and trading with each other, they're both better off. Now, at I'll give you an example of comparative advantage. So Jim was responsible for the group that did the testing of the valves that my group built. And his was the last step. I had to to pass the test there before I could get it shipped out. And so I had one that we were running late on, and I wanted to convince Jim to put my valve further up in the queue. And so I went to his morning meeting where he assigned work. And it was really interesting because Jim was a former naval officer. How would you expect a former naval officer to give out work? You do this, you do that, right? That's what I was expecting. But here's what Jim did. Jim said, hey, I've got a 78 double out 417. Who'd like that one? Hector Caballero raises his hand. He says, I'll take that one. Now, by the way, do you think if people have been doing this long enough, they have certain favorite things they like to do? Yeah. And so he did that. And I thought, wow, that is freaking amazing. Now, is there always going to be someone that's willing to step up and take these things voluntarily? No. And so those are called SLJs, or crappy little jobs, right? And what you do with those is you pass them around, right? Everybody has to dip their finger in that pile of muck. And it's a bonding experience, right? We all had to do it. It's kind of like teaching Finance 380 here at MSU. We've all had to do it, right? Okay. Now, and so what Jim did, and Jim's people really liked Jim as a supervisor. I really liked Jim. Jim made us all look good. Now, along the lines of inclusiveness, I'm going to share one thing about Jim. Jim was gay. Do you think any of us cared? No! Jim made me look good. He treated his guys right. No one cared. So now the next thing here is to bring it to my personal situation. As faculty, you guys know about our teaching. You know somewhat about our research. But the other thing that we do is called service. And that is where some of the things that we do are recruiting, right? And when we recruit, there's basically two jobs you can do. There is giving tours of glass hall, or working a table. When you give the tours, I'm leading a group of about this size, and this is apparently my sweet spot, because I'm lousy one-on-one, and I'm lousy with huge groups, but by golly, I can handle tours. My wife, on the other hand, is really good with small numbers of people, so working at the table as people randomly come up. Oh, for shame, he's late. But those shoes, oh my goodness, you're forgiven. And so, you know, I'm good at this, she's good at that. Should the people force us into one or the other of these? No, they should let us do this, right? And then going to graduation. And this is what really kind of led us to write this paper. I've told you I'm autistic. Loud noises are really, really bad for me. I freaking hate it. And there's always some a-hole with an air horn, right? I hate that. And my wife's got ADHD. She can't sit still, right? And so there we are. I'm freaking out. She's fidgeting. It's awful, right? Let us do these things. There are people who enjoy doing this. They enjoy it a lot. Let them do that, right? And we'll all be happier, and there will be people who are glad that I'm doing tours because they hate to do that, right? And I'm grateful to people who will go to graduation because I've told you, that guy with the air horn, I'm just all over him, right? Okay, now, one of the benefits of this is that we give people a feeling of autonomy. Autonomy. Are you happier when you can kind of choose your path in life or when you're just being told? Yeah, if you get to choose. In fact, this is a big, big, big part of job satisfaction is autonomy. And when you give people the chance to choose what valve they test or to choose how they serve, as long as the work's getting done, who cares, right? The people are happier. Wow, that's probably my longest secret too. Are there any questions? Mr. Sabev, was that?
That was pretty good.
Goal, thank you. Okay, now, you got a question?
Yeah, so for the final exam, is it compulsory to take or can we skip that if we got like good grades for the first
Ooh, very good. I have granted you some autonomy with the final exam. And here's the autonomy. If you've taken exams 1, 2, and 3, and you're happy with the score that it earns for you, right? Just plug in your average score for your final, and if you're happy with that, whew, There's your autonomy. You don't have to take it. Now, if any of you were silly enough to skip exam 1, 2, or 3, you've got to take it anyway. No autonomy. Autonomy is earned, right? By the way, should you give high performers more autonomy? Yeah. And there are some people that you basically have to follow them around with a sharp stick to get them to do anything. There's no autonomy for them. In fact, you remember that crappy job I told you about earlier? I'm going to have them do that job over and over again until either they quit or they stop being trouble. Questions? Will this be on the final exam? Of course not. That's something students always want to know. Is it going to be on the exam? Okay, so last time we talked about options. What is a call option? What does it give you the right but not the obligation to do? Buy. And what does the put option give you the right but not the obligation to do? Sell, which means someone else has to buy. And what do you get in return for writing the option? Premium. Does the person who writes the option have an option? No, they have an obligation. They have an obligation to do whatever the other person decides to do. Now, we can take what we've learned about financial options and we can start looking at stocks and bonds as options because there are some similarities. We say, and we're going to show it to you two ways, as levered equity as a call option, and we're also going to talk about levered equity as a put option. What do we mean by levered equity? Oh, anybody? I'm going to sweeten the pot here. What do we mean by levered equity?
Is it debt?
Yeah, it's got debt in the capital structure. Please don't just leave that under my plate. She told me, she's like, yeah, maybe I'm like, oh man, it's supposed to be special. Probably covered with grease by now. Okay, on with the story. If it were my house, it would be covered with grease by now. Okay, so levered equity is a call option. How in the world does that make sense? Well, you can think of the maturity date of the debt as the expiry of the option. You can think of the maturity date of the debt as the expiry of the option. And we can think of the face value of the debt as the strike price. We can think of the face value of the debt as the strike price. And when we get to that debt coming due, we are going to make a decision. If the value of the firm is greater than the amount of the debt, then we are going to pay off the debt. Right? We're going to exercise our call option, pay off the debt, and keep the company. So let me say that one more time. If the value of the assets is greater than the face value of the debt on the maturity date, we will exercise our call option on the assets by paying off the debt. However, what if the assets are worth less than the face value of the debt? What do we do? Oh, come on, trust your scumbaggy little heart. We owe $100,000. This heap of crap is only worth $70,000. What do we do? Walk away, right? You walk away. You say, oh, here you go, debt holders. Here are the assets. Have a good life, right? And so we are going to let that option expire unexercised, and the debt holders will take control of the assets. So that's why we're saying that it's like an option. In fact, it fits pretty well. We can also look at it as a put option. And the idea is roughly the same. And so the maturity date is the same, or the expiry is the same, the strike price is the same, and we can just say that we're going to put the assets to the debt holders. So you could look at it either way, and it's basically the same idea. Now, so far, this doesn't really help us, except when we start thinking about, in fact, I'm going to flip back up here to Black Scholes. What kinds of things increase the value of the Black Scholes, both for puts and calls? Well, first of all, there's the volatility in the stock price. That's for stock options. What if we're talking about this option that's provided by the equity on the debt? We're talking about the variability of the cash flows from the underlying asset. And the second one is the expiration date. So the more risky this underlying asset is, the more valuable that call option is, or put option, depending on how you want to look at it, that levered equity provides us. And the longer time to maturity, the more valuable it is. If I've got 1 year to maturity on the debt, that is a whole lot less good than if I had 30 years, because I have a whole lot more time for the value of the assets to rise above the value of the debt. Okay, so we will use this options framework and we'll look at some decisions in finance. We're going to look at capital budgeting and what it means for mergers and diversification. And I've got these out of order, so don't let that flip you out, right? Okay, so let's talk about mergers and diversification. First of all, we talked about in chapter 21, we talked about managers saying, oh, one of the things we're doing with this merger is diversifying the firm. Did we say that was a good argument?
No.
No, it's a bad argument. First of all, we know they have to pay a lot of money in order to do these mergers. We can diversify our portfolio for darn near free without their help. So it's a bad, bad, bad thing. Now, think about this though. If we're looking at the levered equity as an option, we know that reducing the risk of the underlying assets actually reduces the value of the option. And so these mergers that are basically for diversification purposes, if that's their only purpose, then they are reducing the volatility, but they're also reducing the value of that option. They're reducing the value of the option. Okay, let's see here. So the equity, this is fun. If we take on the merger and it reduces the volatility of the underlying assets, we said that that's going to reduce the value of the call. That's going to reduce the value of the shares. But if you are one of the debt holders of the firm, are you pleased about this merger? Yeah. Remember, when I bought the bonds from you guys, I was basing the risk on the standalone business. And so maybe I required 7% for my bonds. Well, now that you've got this nice diversified company that's less risky, I would only demand 6%. So suddenly my bonds have gone from being par bonds to being premium bonds, right? And so when you undergo these mergers for purposes of diversification, it is a straight up wealth transfer from the shareholders to the debt holders. Let me say that again. When we undertake a merger for purposes of diversification, it's a straight up wealth transfer from the shareholders to the debt holders, usually bond holders. So, what's your goal? What's the goal of financial management? Maximize shareholder wealth. Are we doing that? No. Does the goal of financial management say anything about the bondholders? No. If you are undertaking a merger for purposes of diversification, are you living out the goal of financial management? Absolutely not. Questions? Okay. So we already talked about that first one. We talked about the second one. Actually, we talked about the third one too. So, if I ever see any of you on CNBC declaring that you are undertaking a merger for purposes of diversification, expect me to call you out on Twitter or X or whatever it's being called on that day. They know better. By the way, do you remember why managers might engage in these diversifying mergers?
To protect themselves.
Yeah, to protect themselves, because Their personal portfolio is terribly undiversified. Why is their personal portfolio terribly undiversified? That's all stock and stock options for their company. And so the only way they can diversify their portfolio is to diversify the company. By the way, there is an argument here for you in something called do you guys know what an ESOP is? What is that?
Employee-owned company.
Yeah, employee stock ownership program. I think that deserves, I don't think anybody else knew that. There you go. Okay. Now, think about this. Is it smart for you to buy stock in the company where you work?
That depends.
Yeah, it really does. And here's why. If they don't offer you a discount, his answer is unequivocally true. It's a bad idea. And here's why. I've got 100% of my human capital tied up in this company. Why would I want to tie my financial capital up there too? Now, here is the only reason that I would engage in this. It has to be, two things have to be true. Number one, they allow you to purchase stock at a discount. And number two, they allow you to sell it immediately. That's the only way. By the way, how often do you think that happens? Yeah, my sister just sold a business and she received some stock, or she had to buy it for like $1.80, but then she was able to sell it for $2.60 after like 90 days or something like that. So that was actually a good thing, right? She was able to buy it at a discount, she was able to get out from under it. But if you're going to be stuck with this stuff, or you're not offering a discount, it's actually a very, very bad idea. I knew people when I worked at Halliburton, and you could put your, retirement money in all sorts of stuff. It was amazing how many people who worked there had their entire retirement tied up in Halliburton stock. That's crazy, because if the company goes belly out, not only are you out of a job, you're out of a retirement. Does that make sense? Example, Enron. You guys remember Enron at all? It's probably, well, you probably weren't conscious then. 2001-ish, right? And Enron, basically, the managers were telling the employees, as the stock was diving, the managers were telling employees, oh, you guys should plow more of your retirement into this Enron stock because, things are going to turn around and you'll just be rich, rich, rich. In the meantime, what were the managers doing? Selling their stock, right? Yes, ma'am.
So if the company has invested in the stock exchange and they're giving you the ESOP, and the company is doing really well, isn't it wise to just increase your shares?
Okay. She's asking, if the company's doing really well, should you be, going ahead and forgetting about diversified portfolios? When the people at Enron started putting their money into the employee stock ownership plan, the company was doing really well. And for 3 or 4 years, they looked like geniuses. You know what they're doing now? They're greeting you proudly at Walmart. If the company is worth investing in, by the way, do you think there are other companies that have similar opportunities? Couldn't you form a diversified portfolio of those stocks and not have your employment and your financial stuff all tied up at the same firm? Yeah, unless they're offering you a great discount and the ability to sell quickly, then go for it. Other questions?
Is it kind of a bad look if executives have diversified portfolios, like when you want them to be all wrapped up in this?
Oh yeah, and in fact that's why we do stock grants and stock options, because we want the managers to be highly focused on creating shareholder wealth. And that's why we said that the managers are basically stuck with this undiversified portfolio, because if they sell their stock in order to diversify their portfolio, then it's a bad look. If you find yourself in this position, and I pray that you do, because we would love to name this college after you. Current price, I think it's $15 million, but we could negotiate. Okay, so if you find yourself in this situation, here's what you do. You say, I am planning to sell this number of shares of stock on these dates in the future. And so you have this planned share sale out there, and you say, I'm going to do it regardless of what the stock price is on that day. And that is a way to signal to the market that you are not getting out because you know things are going badly. Unlike if you just suddenly said, oh, by the way, 29 days ago I sold a boatload of stock, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so what you want to do is it's like a planned sale, and you're going to have, and usually it's like every quarter or every 6 months that they'll sell a certain amount of shares. And your reason, you will state your reason when you do this, to diversify my personal portfolio, right? Instead of, I think this thing's about to go under, so I'm going to get out. Questions? Yeah, studies have shown, and what we do what are called event studies, where we watch the stock price. And if you see an unannounced sale that gets, the announcement comes out afterward, the stock price, right? But if it's these planned sales on the day of the announcement, because you announce it well in advance, nothing happens. And then on the date of the first sale, nothing happens. And on the date of the second sale, nothing happens. Because you're not giving the market any new information. Does that make sense? Okay. Now let's talk about options and capital budgeting. So, as a general rule, managers should not accept low or negative NPV projects and pass up high NPV projects. And so if we're looking at a firm that is all equity, that is absolutely true. But what if we have a lot of leverage? Well, in that case, what if we took on a slightly negative NPV project that was really risky? What would it do to the risk of the underlying assets? It's going to go up. And what's going to happen to the value of the call option that we have on levered equity? That's going to go up too. And so even though we take on the slightly negative NPV project, you may see the share price go up because of the way this whole levered equity call option works. Okay, so what does this lead to? Let's see if it's there. Nope, okay. What does this lead to? What if I was in charge of a company and it looked like we were going to go under? I could go out and take on an extraordinarily risky project. And if that risky project paid off, it would save the firm and the equity would become more valuable. But if the project fails, the value of the equity is going to be zero anyway, right? And so what we see are managers doing these things called Hail Mary passes. Any football people here? What's a Hail Mary pass?
Shit, somebody down there, throw it.
Exactly. You send somebody down there and you throw it. Is it usually a short distance?
No.
No. What are the probabilities of success?
Like 0.1.
Yeah, it's very small, but you know what could happen?
You can win.
You could win, right? And that's exactly what these managers are doing. They're throwing the ball. They're hoping the guy on the other end catches it. We were losing the game anyway, right? Does that make sense? Okay. We actually, I'll give you an example of this. Back when we had the savings and loan crisis in the late 1980s, these savings and loans were in a lot of trouble, and they decided that the only way that they could get out of that was to take some of these risky bets. And so we saw them taking on crazy, crazy things. And you know what? It worked out for some of them. And who ended up picking up the tab were the ones that it didn't. When you walk into a bank, there's a sign with 4 letters on it. What does it say? FDIC. Who is that? Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. The FDIC is left to pick up the pieces, right? And so it's basically these bankers knew that if the Hail Mary pass worked, they'd get to keep their jobs, they get some more money. If it didn't, they were basically back in the situation they were going to be anyway, with the FDIC taking over and them out of a job. And so the Hail Mary pass is actually motivated by this idea of this increased riskiness raises the value of the call option. Questions? Have you ever heard the expression, heads I win, tails you lose? Right? And that's what's going on here. If it's heads, the Hail Mary pass is completed, we win the game. If it's tails, we still lose, but who's actually doing the losing? The person that loaned us the money. Or in the case of the banks, the people who are insuring the people who loaned us the money. Is there some scumbaggery involved there? Absolutely. Okay, so let's go ahead and... So, we talk about real options. Real options are where you invest in something and it gives you the option to do something later down the line. So for example, and this is getting old, the Saw movie references. Let's do something that's probably even started earlier than that. How about Fast and the Furious? Do you know of anything less important than the plot line to a Fast and the Furious movie? There's no importance to the plot line, right? It's like porn. It just doesn't matter. Okay, back to the story. Gotta throw one of those in once in a while just to make sure Mr. Olsis is awake. Okay. Okay, so you do the first Fast and Furious movie. It gives you the right, but not the obligation, to do the second one. And in fact, that first one might have been a slight negative NPV project, but the second one might actually be positive NPV. By the way, we've already built the sets, whatever sets you need for that sort of thing. And so it might cost less to do the second one, and it might be positive NPV. And we see over and over again, Hollywood does this. How many Fast and the Furious movies have there been? Yeah, I lost count. The guy in the Raiders shirt would know. Right? Okay, another example. The original Toyota Prius. Have you guys ever seen one? What a butt-ugly car. And low performance, and it's just a real piece of crap. But what did it give them the option to do? Yeah, the second generation Prius, which by the way, I kind of dug. It was a futuristic, fun-looking car, right? And it was a better performer, and just all sorts of amazing things. And it was probably a positive NPV project on its own, but it also gave them the option to do the third generation Prius. And so we can think of getting options in the real world. Getting a bachelor's degree gave you the option to go for a master's degree. Getting a master's gives you the option to go for PhD. She says no, you don't have to exercise the option. By the way, my wife is so smart. She jumped straight from bachelor's to PhD. Oh yeah. She also finished school or undergrad in 3 years. I finished it in 5. Okay, back to the story. We see real options in the Apple world. So they had iTunes, and that really gave them the option to do the iPod. By the way, the iPod wouldn't have been worth much without iTunes, right? And then the iPhone gives them even more options. By the way, you couldn't do the Apple Watch without the iPhone. And so when you're making a decision on the iPhone, you also need to keep in mind the value of these other real options. By the way, AirPods, I think they're called. That's another one of the real options that doing the iPhone gave you. Questions? Wow, that is the end of chapter 17. Any questions about options?
It's not options.
Go ahead.
Question related, but there are special classes, and with those special classes, right, like before we talked about that example, they can have a special dividend class as well if they pay more dividends versus.
Okay, folks, he's got a good question here. When we talked about share classes, the differences are in the voting rights. The cash flow rights are always the same. The cash flow rights are always the same. But the differences in the voting rights. Good question. Other questions? Yes?
Can you write options in a private company?
Oh, Yeah, so you can actually negotiate options, and usually the people that you negotiate with are going to be the big banks in New York. So I could go with J.P. Morgan, and people do that all the time. They end up buying options on land, or they could buy options on buying another company. I mean, there are all sorts of options. Used to be, how did we figure out the value of those options? It was basically a guess, and it was something that the people developed a sense for over time. How do you think we price them now? What did we talk about last time? The Black-Scholes option pricing model. Oh yeah, we have the ability. Now, here's the thing though. You have to have the ingredients to be able to calculate that. So you have to be able to somehow figure out what's the volatility of the cash flows from this underlying asset, right? And so that's probably the toughest one of those ingredients to get your hand on, because you can negotiate the expiry date, right? You can negotiate the strike price, but figuring out that volatility. In fact, right now, or I shouldn't say right now, but you can actually take an option price, and you can take the share price and all the other information, and you can back yourself into the implied volatility. The option price implies a predicted volatility for the underlying asset. Good question. Other questions? Okay. Go ahead and read the hubris hypothesis, because we are definitely going to talk about it next time. But would it break your heart if I let you go early for once? No. Okay. So, stand up. Hey, feel free to stay if you like. I'm going to go eat a sandwich.